Richard Plantagenet was born at Fotheringhay Castle, in Northamptonshire, England, on October 2, 1452. Richard's father was Richard Plantagenet, the 3rd Duke of York, and his mother was Cecily Neville. His father also had claim to the throne of King Henry VI. Richard was the 12th child of 13. He married Anne Neville, and they had one child together, Edward of Middleham. Richard's education would have been of the very highest standard. He spent several of his childhood years at Middleham Castle, under the watchful eye of Richard Neville, his cousin, and the 16th Earl of Warwick. Warwick would later earn the moniker of the Kingmaker, due to his involvement in the War of the Roses. Richard would also come into contact with another member of the household, who would later become very important to him, his future wife, Anne Neville. Richard's mother, the Duchess of York, would decide it was best to send both Richard and his older brother George to the Low Countries. Following the Lancastrian defeat at the Battle of Hatton, Richard and George made their return to England for the coronation of their eldest brother, Edward. Richard was named Duke of Gloucester, made a Knight of the Garter, and a Knight of the Bath. Richard would be sent back to Middleham Castle, to undertake his knightly training. He would be there until he was 12 years of age. Richard's involvement in the War of the Roses began at an early age. In 1464, at 11 years of age, he was appointed the sole Commissioner of Array, by his brother, the King, and by the time he reached 17 years, he was dependent on no one. In 1470, Warwick defected to the side of Margaret of Anjou. At this time, the King, together with Richard, sought refuge in Burgundy, as their sister Margaret was the wife of the Duke of Burgundy, and they knew they would be safe there, until they could return to England. Which they did in the spring of 1471, when Edward was restored to his throne. Feelings would become fraught between the brothers, George and Richard, when in 1472, Anne Neville and Richard married. The inheritance left by the Kingmaker was shared equally between his daughters, the elder of whom was Isabel Neville, married to George. As there were no male heirs in the Warwick household, Warwick's widow retained her ownership of her lands, as it was she that had brought the wealth to Warwick. Under these fractious conditions, the brothers would find little peace between them. Richard's rise to the throne of England began at the death of his brother King Edward IV. Richard was proclaimed Lord Protector of the King's 12-year-old son, Edward V. Richard would take custody of both boys, Edward, together with his younger brother, 9-year-old Richard, and have them escorted to the Tower of London. It is said that Richard was informed by a clergyman that the marriage between King Edward IV and Elizabeth Woothville was invalid, due to the King's earlier involvement with Eleanor Butler. This meant that all children born of the King, by Elizabeth, were illegitimate, making Richard himself the rightful heir to the throne. Although the majority were in favour of Richard taking the throne, there were still a few who believed Henry Tudor had more right, and called for his return from exile, in Brittany. An army, in favour of Henry Tudor, met that of King Richard III, at Bosworth Field. It has been suggested that during the battle, part of Richard's army changed allegiance, thus making the outcome in Henry Tudor's favour. It was reported that King Richard fought bravely, and valiantly, to the death, on that battlefield on August 22, 1485. Richard III's legacy would be one of a man that cared for the common person. He set up the Court of Requests that allowed poor common people to have their grievances heard, even though they could not afford legal representation. He was also responsible for the introduction of bail, which helped suspected lawbreakers stay out of prison, until such time as their cases were heard, which meant they would not lose their property to seizure. He also lifted the ban on printing, and the selling of books, going so far as to order the laws, and statutes, of the land be translated, from French, to English.